Yeah.
We're
The
going
25th of February.
Yeah.
25th. It's still tough on all over. I've been submitting this. One division say, you didn't use it. Okay, I was like, no, and then I did 11 lower.
Okay, folks, if I can ask everyone to have a seat, please. I am going to call this meeting of the Town of Missouri Planning Board to order. At this time, if you'll please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any adjustments or additions to our agenda tonight?
No.
That would be no. Okay, everyone received an electronic version of the minutes from our previous meeting. If there are any changes, we need to discuss those now. If not, I would love to hear a motion to approve those minutes. A motion to approve. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Moore. All in favor, aye. Any opposed? Passed unanimously. And do we have any public comment? Do I need to check that?
I think the applicant signed up for public comment, but they're prepared to speak during the.
And having no old business, we're going to shift right into the new business. And so tonight we are going to be looking at the major special use permit SUP 22-01. This is talking about the proposed townhomes. We actually spoke with this group previously at a pre-application conference, so this should be familiar with the members of the planning board. So we're going to let Mike kind of give an overview of that, and I suppose the applicants will be available for any questions that we might have at that point as well. I did want to stress, as you guys saw in your packet tonight, that the job of the planning board tonight, we have a couple of options. We are here to potentially make a recommendation of approval to town council. We can attach that with or without conditions. We can recommend the project for denial to town council. We can withhold and make no recommendation, or we can choose to table it for 45 days. So that's essentially what we are challenged to do this evening. So I'm going to turn that over to Mike for a quick overview.
Thank you. Good evening, planning board members. I'm just going to summarize my staff report for the benefit of the public listening online. So the town received a major special use permit application on January 14th from Long Branch Development. It's for a multifamily townhome development of approximately 148 units on 37 acres at 2211 and 2253 Jeffress Road. Their properties are zoned mixed use and neighborhood commercial, which allow for this permitting process for multifamily. Ultimate, like the chair was speaking about, ultimate approval authority rests with town council. And basically, we brought this application to town council last week, which voted to forward it to the planning board for a recommendation. And as the chair mentioned, we held a pre-application meeting with staff, believe it or not, August 11th of last year, and the pre-application conference with this board, September 7th. So we talked a little bit about this, but I'm just going to summarize this for some of the new board members and the benefit of the public. So special use permits are decided in an evidentiary hearing that's based only on professional or expert evidence submitted into the record. So evidence and materials submitted to the planning board tonight, while they could be similar discussions that are had tonight, are not a basis for the final decision made by town council. As the chair talked about, the planning board's role is to make a recommendation for or against as the board wishes. But again, even that recommendation is not considered expert testimony that could be used as a basis for a decision. So the board's role is to highlight areas of concern, topics that council may want to look at, potential conditions, etc. There's a summary basically of all the multifamily requirements in your packet, which I provided an analysis of. And then I guess I'll just move on to the recommendation from staff. In the evidentiary hearing, staff will not make a recommendation, but tonight, because again, this is more of an informal hearing regarding this proposal, staff will. So staff is recommending approval of major special use permit 2201 with some minor revisions. Primarily, the plans meet the goals of the Making Mills River 2040 comprehensive plan, specifically goal 6 about encouraging housing diversity and choices. The subject property is also adjacent to and partly categorized as the community center district in the future land use map. And this lists desirable uses for that district as duplexes, townhomes, apartments, etc. And then there's additional comprehensive plan objectives and policies that this development is in alignment with that are on the last page of the staff report. That's the end of my summary. I'm happy to answer questions. The applicant does have a PowerPoint presentation, a brief presentation they'd like to give as part of their public comment, and then we can both be available for questions.
Okay, so I think perhaps, we would just let you guys do the PowerPoint first. It might answer some questions that we have, and then we'll hit you both with some questions.
Excellent.
As Michael mentioned, we put together a quick PowerPoint just as a refresher to our petition. So my name is Brett Bastnight. I'm with Long Branch Development. We are the petitioner. With us on our team, we have Brooks Engineering, Mark Brooks, and Colin with the traffic engineer, here to answer any questions that you may have.
Oh, sorry, you need to
Interesting.
slip the power button on the side, left side.
Of course.
If not, I can advance it for you.
No, this is perfect. There we go. So a little more about Long Branch Development. We're based in the upstate of South Carolina. We have offices in Greenville and Spartanburg, but we have a regional footprint. All that we develop are top-end luxury housing opportunities. That includes apartments, conventional apartments, but also townhomes. Our application tonight is for an attached townhome development. We have 2 different product types that we'd like to go over with you guys, but these are representative images of projects we have recently completed that fit the scale and the intent of what we're going to present tonight. A little aerial site context for the development. Our petition is for 2 different parcels on Jeffers Road near the intersection of Boylston Highway. As our traffic analysis, Colin studied 3 different intersections, which he can speak to later if there are additional questions. The primary ingress egress will be on Jeffers leading out towards Boylston. That's a signalized intersection. And then the secondary would be on Cardinal Road. A little more deep dive into the parcels that we're speaking to. The property that's outlined in pink is the Franklin Family Trust property. It's currently being used as a single family home on the frontage of Jeffers, but also a tomato farm on the back end of the property. The parcel that's outlined in yellow is part of the Calvary Fellowship Church campus. This is just one 4-acre piece of their larger campus. Mark Chapman's here tonight in support of our petition. He is part of the elder group that represents the church. For the existing use on the church property, there is a septic leach field, but otherwise it's gone unused up until now. The by right zoning on the property, which Michael touched on earlier, is for neighborhood commercial, which allows a variety of uses, including retail, office, and residential through the special use permit application. This is a little deep dive into our site plan. Since the last time we were here, we added the 4 acres on the Calvary Fellowship Church parcel. That's on the top of the site plan there, the east side of the site plan.
So what we're proposing is a townhome use for the site. The only difference between a for sale townhome and the rental townhomes that we are showing you is where the check goes. It would all be owned by Long Branch Development, and these would be rentals. Otherwise, it's 2 stories at a maximum height. We have 22-foot product on the interior, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. And then we have 28-foot product on the exterior. So those will have a master down living condition. On the south side of the page, or page south there, you can see where we have the amenity. The amenity will include a dog park, small dog park and dog run, a pool, cabana, leasing office, and management housing. So this project will be professionally managed with 24-hour maintenance and management on site 7 days a week. Here are some precedent images of projects, more projects that we have been involved with. The interior units are on the bottom left picture. Those are the 22-foot front-loaded townhomes. The living condition there would be an open floor plan on the ground level with a kitchen. And then the dwelling aspect of rooms would be on the second floor. So townhome, like in every sense of the word. The 28-foot product is shown on the top 2 images. That has a master down and an open floor plan with a guest bedroom. Here are some more pictures. What we envision for this project and what we do on all of our projects are 42-inch cabinets with pulls, granite countertops, and luxury vinyl flooring. The upstairs master dwelling units on the 22-foot product have a very large master unit, walk-in closet, and luxury bathroom. These are a couple of precedent images for projects we've developed. These are the amenities. What we are proposing for this development would be the top right picture. That's the actual footprint of what we're showing on the site plan. So on the far right of that image, you can see the leasing office, the mail kiosks, and the gathering spaces. On back in the pool, you can see the outdoor cabana. And then, so the big question is, who is the renter here? In our regional footprint, what we've seen a lot of is what we like to call an apartment graduate. So that's somebody exiting kind of an urban dwelling unit, maybe in downtown Asheville, in their early to late 30s, and they're starting to think about a family. We see a lot of newlyweds, a lot of folks that are engaged, and we don't get too many children, but we do believe there will be more children here than in a conventional apartment complex. Because we're offering a master down floor plan, any place where we've done that, we've seen a lot of empty nesters. People that want the lock and leave lifestyle, and those folks typically have 2 pets. So a lot of pets will be in this community. With that, that kind of concludes the overview of the petition. Again, our full design team is here to answer any questions that you may have. Before I turn it over for questions, one thing I failed to mention were the square footages and the rent level. The average square footage for this product, the blended square footage between the interior units and the exterior, will be 1,600 square feet. They will all have an attached garage. The average rent level for that is estimated to be over $1,800 per month.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now you may just want to stay there because I'm sure there's going to be some questions and we want to be sure we get you on audio for our online folks. So I'm just going to let any of you, first of all, start with questions. I have some of my own, but I will let you guys start.
I've got one. I'm fairly new to the planning board, but the density, well, it states 4 units per acre, and I was just wondering, in my mind, it's 4 units on each acre. And it appears, there's going to be like 16.5 acres left over for the parking thing. So how does that work? What's the thinking on that?
We are taking the density from the overall acreage size and moving it to a condensed area. And we find that works best just from an efficiency of utilities. But Michael, I can't answer the planning side of that.
There's a couple different development, special types of development in the town zoning code that actually call for that specific type of density plan, where you have clustered housing units on one section of a parcel in order to actually preserve land, whether it be wetland, floodplain, forested areas in another part of the parcel. So the overall calculation is for, 148 units divided by 37 acres equals 4, so they meet the maximum. But again, the intent of allowing that is for land preservation and open space.
Any questions?
I just have a comment, I guess, more than anything. Of course, I remember being here before. And, one thing I remember, question I asked, and I know it's impossible to predict. Now you're saying $1,800 a month,
Yes, sir.
is that a fixed or an average?
Well, ultimately, the market will decide. We estimate that to be the average. We've seen a fair amount of rent and sales inflation in the greater area, and I think it speaks to the quality of the
So
town of Mills
what
River.
you're saying is some apartments would rent for more or maybe less than others.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I have a comment, it sounds good, it looks good, but, I was on this comprehensive plan thing too, and I'm quoting from it, encourage housing choices for persons of all ages and different income levels. Kind of narrows it down to income level, that's my comment on that. And another one, and the thing was objective 2.8, availability of workforce and affordable housing. That's something we've been talking about for 9 years that I've been on the board, and I know it's tough out there for developers to come up with something, and I don't know what the answer would be. This is not going to be workforce housing, that's for certain. I don't think the average school teacher, deputy sheriff, or healthcare worker is going to be able to afford it. But going back to what I said before, it looks good and it's nice, but in the long run, we're back where we started when we start talking about workforce housing. And I think that's the only comments I have right now.
And I'll just briefly respond. The intent of staff, and including that objective from the comprehensive plan, this is not workforce or affordable housing, but as you know, many of the houses currently being built in Mills River are selling for $1 million or more. This is not that, so it's just to highlight the difference there.
So there are a couple of things, and I'm not sure if you should answer this or if Mike should answer this. But looking through the policy analysis that you gave us, Mike, there are several requirements that were listed, and then there are some things that you put were not available or weren't provided with the plan. As you went through, are those things required to be a part of the plan before it can be approved by town council?
I just based this analysis off the submittal requirements, I guess you can call them. It doesn't preclude anything from being approved without that, but it's just a basis staff looks at in terms of what's required. So if there's specific items that were not provided or are missing or that I called out, I would direct you to ask the applicant about those because I don't know that information.
Okay, so one question I have that you've clarified a little bit was building height, because we one of the things that we require is that minimum separation of 20 feet, maximum of 30 feet, but when a building exceeds 20 feet in height, then you have to allow 1 foot of space between the buildings for every increase in height over 20 feet. So if you've got those buildings that are 28, I think you said 28 feet on the exterior, is that correct? The height was 28 feet on the exterior perimeter?
I was speaking to the width. The
Okay.
height of the building
So
will be
what's the height?
approximately 30 feet. 30
Okay.
feet high.
And what's the distance between those buildings?
I think it's 22 between.
22.
Does that fulfill what we had in mind?
So if the buildings, just reading this section, if the buildings are proposed at 30 feet in height, the ordinance says when buildings exceed 20 feet, the separation shall be increased an additional foot for every foot of increased height. So basically, the building separation
It's 30
would
feet
need to be
also.
30 feet.
Okay. That's what I thought. That's what I read. That's what was my understanding. So I just want to make sure that that was clear and that would be reflected in the plan as well. The last time that you guys were here, one of the things that I suggested to you, or that I encouraged you to do, was to reach out to our elementary school principal who was in that district, just to establish a relationship and let him know what the plan was, how things were going. Has that been done at this point?
Yes, ma'am, it has. Lines of communication are open.
Okay, so you've actually talked to him.
I have, yes, earlier this week. We had
Perfect.
a conversation about the site plan specifically.
So, and again, I am an educator, and so one of my concerns is always going to be the load on schools, and I know that there is not a good answer to that either.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily your responsibility to help the schools eliminate that problem. But I would encourage you to continue to keep those lines of communication open. Mr. Hart is here, the principal of Glen Marlowe is here tonight. Thank you for coming. We want to keep you in the loop on this, because as you know, and I think he would reiterate this, that elementary school is already full. So you're not, you're talking about adding to classrooms, but you're also talking about having to add teachers, and you're talking about adding buses and bus drivers, which we don't even have now to start with. So it's just a lot to think about. And I'm not saying that that should stop this project, because projects have to move forward and growth happens, but just, I would encourage you to continue to communicate with Principal Hart and, let him express his concerns, and you guys work together as a team.
On that topic, you mentioned that you didn't expect your target population to have a lot of children or school-age children. What's that based on?
Well, we've developed over 10 of these communities around the southeast, so we have some pretty good data points. Now, it always varies from submarket to submarket, and we know that you guys have fantastic schools here. And so I do think we will have some children. Typically, I would say we see children on the lower end of the spectrum just because of that apartment dweller demographic that I mentioned. Probably not a lot of middle schoolers or high schoolers here. It would be more elementary schoolers, kindergartners. Yes, ma'am.
Any additional questions from anyone? Okay, we'll let you have a seat. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
So since we've addressed all the questions that you guys might have had, at this point, we need to move forward with a recommendation of the 4 options that we have. So put that out there. And then we can recommend this project for approval with or without conditions. We can recommend it for denial. We can make no recommendation whatsoever, or we can table it for up to 45 days. Are we still thinking? I mean, if you're not sure, let's talk about it. Otherwise, we can table it or make a recommendation.
I think from a traffic standpoint, it's answered all of my questions. I did look through it, and not a whole lot of traffic. It's apartments, townhomes don't generate the traffic that single-family homes do. And even still, once you distribute those out through the network, the impact's just not that great for this. So, good job on the TIA. And it would answer any questions I'd have, and it should The DOT should be fine with it if they review it. Just my opinion.
I guess my question would be, if we approve it with conditions, what are some of the conditions that we think that should be?
One may be those missing items. Make sure that those missing items are provided as needed.
And Mike, is that just to give the things that were listed in your analysis, the things that perhaps were not included, that would be required to be there upon approval of this project if it were so moved by council?
The planning board's condition cannot be binding. It's more of a it's just part of the recommendation. Because council makes the final decision in the evidentiary hearing, really the slate's wiped clean, if you will, and they make their decision based on the findings of facts and the evidence presented in that hearing. Now, of course, I'll deliver a staff report that will constitute submitted evidence in that hearing, and that'll include a planning board recommendation. But again, the conditions are more for this board to highlight for council consideration if something pops up. To elaborate, in theory, the applicant could submit the exact same plans to council without addressing any of the missing items. And council could approve it with a condition that those items be addressed, if that clarifies them.
Michael, I do have a quick question about exterior lighting. Does our ordinance require cutoff so that it doesn't go up, it just shines down? Or is that something that the development is putting in so that it shine down and not? And I know the big globe lights are really pretty and stuff, but they take away from the sky.
The town has no lighting standards, so I would defer to the applicant on what they normally install in these communities.
We typically look at leasing our lighting from the local utility provider. We'd absolutely be happy to consider that.
Yes, sir. It does provide those pedestrian level, the shorter poles that LEDs that have a top. So that's, I work for those in Asheville a lot.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for the recommendation.
Excuse me, one other question I have or concern is, have y'all looked into is there going to be a sprinkler system in these units, or
That's a great question. There will not be. So these are townhomes in every sense of the word. They will be designed to the IRC, the International Residential Code. So between every single unit, you'll have the 2-hour fire party wall for the IRC.
they will have firewalls?
Yes, sir. They will absolutely have firewalls. Thank you. Very good question.
You said between every unit, there'll be a firewall.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, if there's 4 units in a building, they'll have 3 firewalls.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, since you're finally talking, any more questions? Or being so passionate. Don't think these men are gonna bite you, just ask them questions.
I wonder about from your other projects. Do you have a sense of how many of these units would go to multiple renters? In other words, people sharing the rent as opposed to a family sharing the whole rent?
Very good question. We actually see quite a bit of that. And, you know, the best thing about doing projects close to home is I would welcome the opportunity to meet you guys at one of our projects in the upstate of South Carolina and tour you around the community so you can see it, touch it, and feel it. But we do see on the younger end of the spectrum, shared renter situations. And we will have some 2-bedrooms in here. There'll be 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. And the way we attract that exact scenario you just laid out is we do a double master bedroom. So there's no, renter picking the better bedroom and somebody else getting shafted with anything less than that. They're identical.
So that might begin to address the issue of affordability.
Yes, sir.
I just have another question.
Please.
You said some of them will be 3 bedrooms,
Yes.
but they will have 2 masters, you said.
I'm sorry, perhaps I wasn't clear. So some of the units, some of the townhomes will be 3 bedrooms. Some of the other townhomes will be 2 bedrooms. So for instance, those 28-foot wide plans that have the master down, those are likely to be a 2-bedroom unit that has an optional office space, but it'll be a 2-bedroom unit, 2-bathroom unit. Now, those interior units, the ones that are the townhomes with the attached garage, those will be a 3-bedroom with 2.5 bath.
Any other questions?
It was brought up about the schools and you spoke with Mr. Hart, did that conversation go well with you and Lightness and what those discussed?
I thought it went very well. I think you guys have a fantastic principal here. He left, okay. So you can ask him directly. I would never want to speak for him, but quite honestly, he said all the things that you want a principal of an elementary school to say. And he said he welcomed the children with open arms. I told him I'd send him the presentation directly and invited him tonight, and he showed up. So he seems very involved in the community.
I understand that you were here to speak on behalf. Was it this gentleman?
Sure.
And did you, I know you were here. I didn't know if you wanted to take a minute just to speak your support. Wanted to give you the opportunity to do that.
Sure. My name is Mark Chapman. I'm one of the elders at Calvary Fellowship. Just a little bit of background. The developer, Brett Bassnight, reached out to us, showed an interest in some of our property. And we presented that to the church, and we have agreed to certain terms of what that would look like. And we put that to the church vote, and it was unanimous. The church was fully in support of this project. We see it as a win-win. It's going to allow us to connect to some public utilities. That should help us in the future, especially if we have a school at our church. So we might need to expand at one point in the future, and that would certainly help us commence.
The church is selling this other partial to them for this, right?
Correct.
Is it contingent upon approval?
Absolutely.
So, well, I guess what I'm saying is, if for some reason you didn't get this partial, what would be your plans for proceeding?
So just so I understand this correctly, if something happened with the church parcel,
Yes.
what would we do? Well, we feel like the petition stands with just the Franklin family. Now, we're excited to be working with the church. Not only are we expanding the footprint of the development, but as Mark mentioned, we're bringing water directly to their property so they can make a tie-in for future development plans.
So it's a win-win situation for both of you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. All right, any additional questions? Okay. So back to that question.
I think we can make them for approval.
Would you like to make that?
I will make a motion for that, yes.
Okay, so Heath has made a motion that we recommend this project for approval. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Mr. Foster has seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That has passed unanimously that we would recommend approval to town council. So now I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to dash out before we move on to our next order of business, if you'd like to.
Okay.
Thank you for your time and your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps we'll see you again.
Stay, if you want to talk about TIAs.
Oh, there's more?
We're talking about TIAs.
Oh.
Okay, so we, as they are exiting, we are going to move on to our next order of new business, and that is discussion of a traffic impact analysis requirements. This was brought up at our last meeting that we would talk about at this current meeting, and I asked you to do some thinking and bring to the table some ideas that you have regarding what you'd like to see in Mills River. Perhaps tweaking our requirements. And Mike, I'm going to ask you to give us a refresher on what types of development currently require a TIA, and it is minimal, I know. So that's why we're at this point. So I'm going to turn it over to you. In a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. There were some complaints on Facebook Live, so you'll have to repeat that. There's some issues hearing our sound, I guess.
I just kind of gave a refresher of what brought us to this point to discuss TIAs. And I asked for you just to give us a reminder of what currently requires a TIA in Mills River, which is minimal.
The only ordinance written requirement for a TIA is for major subdivisions. So that's any subdivision of land, 12 lots or larger. With multifamily developments like the group that just came before you, it's not explicitly written in the code, but staff always highly recommends it, knowing that usually the planning board or council will ask for it, because in those special types of developments like multifamily, cluster development, planned unit developments, there's basically a line in the application requirements and in the process that says council and the planning board can ask for any additional information as seen necessary. So that's why we recommended, usually in the pre-application meeting with those types of developments, that they, start developing the TIA early. But the only one where it's actually written in the ordinance is major subdivisions.
Thanks, Mike. So what I would ask that we do is just talk a little bit. Our goal tonight is to give Mike some direction in terms of perhaps putting together a text amendment that would, well, I don't even know if the text amendment, you may correct me, Mike, what it would end up looking like, but some items in the ordinance that perhaps would require a TIA for other types of development as well.
Yeah, to have it incorporated in the ordinance, a text amendment would be necessary. But yeah, I think the item on the agenda tonight was just initial discussions. I know we've talked about what types of commercial developments, industrial developments could exceed thresholds that could trigger a TIA. But a text amendment would be necessary to add it to the regulations.
Okay, you guys had 2 weeks to talk about this and discuss it and think about it. So looks like Mr. Elliott is ready to jump on his speaker.
Well, I just had a question. I mean, it seems like we're talking about traffic implications. And without considering, we just approved the property that's being developed contiguous to this, I believe, the Part E parcel. So is there a better way to look at traffic implications if we're looking at them in aggregate as opposed to?
I think what board member Moore recommended last time, and again, I'm no traffic expert by any means, was to have a table with trip thresholds. So if we looked at it, and Jeff, feel free to chime in, if we looked at basically a commercial development of so many square feet, it could be expected to generate X number of trips, and that happens, if it happens to be above this threshold, a TIA would be required. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And generally, the TIA takes a look at the impacts of what happens. What we just saw in this TIA tonight was that, you know, the 148 townhomes really didn't cause that much of an impact. And it's a tough question. I was asked the question one time by the Asheville Planning Board. When is the straw that breaks the camel's back? But is that really fair to have 4 developments? The first 3 are built. The 4th one then triggers something that has to pay for all the effects of the first 3 as well. The way that it's generally looked at, most municipalities that require TIAs have a number threshold. And I did a little research. About 100 is the standard number for a peak hour. Now, a peak hour is 4 15-minute periods together that have the highest. You add them up, and that occurs sometime between 7 and 9 a.m. or 4 and 6 p.m. And the general thinking is if you can handle a peak hour, you can pretty much handle the rest of the day. So 100 trips in a peak hour, that's a little less than 2 per minute. And once those are entering and exiting, and then that's spread out amongst the surrounding infrastructure. Some municipalities require 1,000 trips per day. Some require 1,000 or 100 in a peak hour. Some will require 500 per day. When you think about 500 trips per day, now a trip is me getting in the car, running to the store, and coming back. That's 2 trips. Me getting halfway to the store and remembering I forgot my wallet and going back. I'm not sure if that's figured in or not, but when you figure in the going to the store and back, then the mail, then UPS, all these trips are all figured. It's a big average. And what they do is they look across the country and they look at various uses of this type and come up with either an equation, which kind of fits the curve, or a rate. So 10 trips per single family home per day is generally accepted. So I went and looked at some different uses just to give you all an idea of the perspective. If for this development, townhomes, we've got a new code out there, 215, is single family attached. And that says, okay, there's going to be a single family in this dwelling, but it's attached to 1 or more other dwellings. And 175 units would hit 100 trips in a peak hour. This one hit 1,077 in a peak hour with 148. Just to throw that out for perspective. For single family homes, 101 units would reach 100 trips in a PM peak hour and 1,018 daily. So 101 single family homes would be a trigger if we chose 100. For apartments, and I'm glad you're sitting down, 255 units would hit 100 in a peak hour because apartments don't generate the trips necessarily that single family home does. 1,000 or 1,170 daily trips for 255 units. An office, if you had a 50,000 square foot office, you'd hit 100 in a peak hour, but you'd only have 690 daily trips. So in an office, most people are coming and going during the lunch time or during the morning and leaving in the evening PM with some going out for lunch, etc. Fast food restaurants, 2,200 square feet, if they've got a drive-through, would hit 1,000 trips per day. But 1,900 square feet would hit 100 in a peak hour. So those are just a few minutes worth of, looking at the trip generation manual and coming up with some numbers.
So I have a question for Perhaps you, I'm not even sure. But for someone to be required to have a TIA completed, is there an average cost for that?
Well, we're seeing the cost go up a little bit because it takes more time. It's,
Give me a range.
give you a range, $15,000 to $20,000, depending on where and the complexity. It also depends on the number of intersections. If you have 3 or 4 intersections, it would be on the lower range. 5 or 10 intersections, say 10 intersections, now you're looking at, it's really an order of magnitude rather than just so many times that, because that makes the analysis, the model you have to build, the computer model, and then the write-up. I mean, that takes a long time to sit down and write up your findings and not use ain't and done in the same sentence. And things like that will read well in a technical manner and yet get it across in a way that it's usable information. So it all depends on the complexity, I guess, to say, and where it's located. And what we're looking for. Here, we don't really have the pedestrians that we would be looking at in a downtown situation. So we don't need to look at pedestrian levels of service. We will have the bike network soon, hopefully. And we can look at some of those trips, maybe bicycle trips, which would be good, but that lowers the vehicular impact. Something that comes from a TIA is, and I was working with, I'm working with Lincoln County, and they require us to not only look at, okay, so we have levels of service. Pardon me for going off on a lecture, but we really look at the level of service. And the level of service comes down to delay. We don't necessarily look at Jeffers Road. It's a 2-lane road, it's fairly wide, but the choke points are the intersections. So unsignalized intersections, you're not necessarily going to have the problems you're going to have at a signalized intersection. Why? Because a signal assigns right of way to everyone who comes up is going to get their chance. Some intersections, Boylston Highway 280, well, 280 is going to get most of the traffic signal time. But when we start adding people to the side street and getting them onto the intersection, onto the road, we have to take the time off the main road. So that's where it starts to get difficult. And when we're looking at levels of service, that comes down to delay. And I don't have the table in front of me, but 5-10 seconds, that's nothing. Usually 10 seconds around it, that's level of service A. When you start getting to about 25-30 seconds, I don't remember the exact number, you're going to hit level of service B. And then C, D, F, that's overcapacity. And once you're at that intersection is, quote, failing, and yet they're out there operating now. So the charge becomes from the developer to do no harm. There's going to be some delay. If you have an intersection level of service A, and you build 25 homes, it's not going to cause the intersection to fail. If you have an intersection that's operating level of service D, which is almost at capacity, and you build those 25 or 30 homes really close, and you develop, right? You could have that drop to a level of service E. Some municipalities require you to make improvements to bring it back up so that you're really doing no harm as far as that level of service goes. I don't know that we want to get there. I don't know. I think that the NCDOT has very clear guidelines for a TIA. And if we just require a consultant to follow those guidelines, if we require it now with this one, I'm not sure if we didn't require it, it doesn't have to go through the DOT process, I don't think. But if we as a town require a TIA through the ordinance, NCDOT takes jurisdiction over it, even if it doesn't meet their threshold, they review it. So they look at the recommendations and say, those are good recommendations, or we need you to do this too. Or they also help set the scope, which is a convenient thing for us as a town, DOT will say, well, you need to look at this intersection, or this intersection. Usually the consultant looks at it and says, I think we need these intersections. The DOT has the opportunity to say yes or add one or two or whatever. So, say the benefit of the DOT looking at it is we don't have to hire someone to look at it and determine if it's correct. And then they have, statutorily, they have 10 days to approve the scope, then 20 days to determine if it's complete, then 20 more days to determine if it's correct. So you're looking at a 50 business day time period if everything goes well. I'm hoping one day something will go well. No, it goes well. Routinely, we get them through in that time, and they don't have any questions. So does that kind of make sense? Does that the TIA helps make sure the development doesn't severely impact the surrounding infrastructure?
So I have another question.
Sure.
So you've already said the average cost for a TIA is 15 to 20,000. Does a TIA take into consideration the type of traffic? So for example, on Banner Farm Road, the impact of tractor trailers and things of that nature have a far greater impact, I believe, not only on traffic delays or, you've got a tractor trailer that can't make the turn radius onto, 191, so traffic gets backed up. Not to mention the wear and tear on a 2-lane rural highway. Does the TIA consider any of that?
That's a great question. The DOT maintains the secondary road system or primary road system, many of the road systems to handle legal loads. So they really don't, as long as the loads are legal, for a tractor trailer, 80,000 pounds or less. So if the road is showing wear for legal loads, then it's the DOT's responsibility to patch the potholes, et cetera. Or a generator to come in and have 100 tractor trailers. I still don't know of a mechanism to make them pay for the road. However, it's in their interest to keep the road in good shape. There is a truck percentage in the traffic counts. And then as far as how does that affect the traffic signal? If we know that it's primarily trucks, we can adjust that percentage in the future build out conditions to show we went from 2% trucks, which is generally average, to 10% trucks at this intersection. And then that figures into the computer model, which then figures in the level of service and the delay. Because it does take a truck longer to start up than it does a car. As far as turn radii, et cetera, that's more of an overall DOT type, the owner of the road. For a driveway, then the person building the driveway needs to build it to handle their traffic. And common improvements are to add an additional lane. So you'd have a 2-lane approach at the driveway. The driveway is really 3 lanes because you've got 1 in and 2 out. And that's a common improvement. Turn lanes in and out of a development, that's a common improvement because you generate enough left turns, you need a left turn lane so people can wait for the opposing traffic to get through. Right turn lanes in, those are important, especially if it's a higher speed road. Somebody's trying to turn right, they need to slow down to do so. So the turn lane can help them get over here out of traffic in order to make that. Sight distance, it's up to the applicant to provide adequate sight distance. The TIA, we usually don't get into the sight distance. That's more of a civil type engineer. Yes.
Oftentimes.
So you end up having to do that.
Yes.
Okay, and feel free to come up and make comments. Don't let me steal the show.
Well, if I can add.
Absolutely.
Jeff is making great comments. And my name's Colin Kenton for the record. So I'm a traffic engineer. He hadn't said anything I don't disagree with. The question about trucks, and I've done this in other traffic studies where it's been requested, and it really depends on the use. But in a lot of cases, if you're looking at an industrial type development or a high commercial where you're potentially gonna have a lot of truck traffic, you may want that traffic study to look at the truck route, just to see where the trucks, how are they getting to them from interstate? Is the road capable? The issue is, obviously, it's a DOT road, it's their responsibility, but it sometimes can be helpful. If the intersection is a poor intersection and making a right-hand turn because it's a sharp intersection is gonna be difficult, that may be something then that may need to be mitigated. So That's all I had really add about that.
Okay, and, that's something else, if, the route is, not a great route, sometimes the state can provide funds for economic development that can help address that and help widen it. And, help keep that road up. I've seen, a place here in North Carolina that ended up getting all of the Amazon returns. All. It's a former furniture factory, so it did see some tractor trailers in its past life, but nothing like it saw when they got that. I mean, you got to be careful when you pray for success or patience, and they certainly got success, and parking lots full of trailers. But the state's aware of it, working on it, and I wish them even more success. But the roads weren't used to that level of trucks. So does that help?
It does. I have always thought, and I continue even after this discussion, I would love to somehow find a way to address requiring certain industries to require them to do a TIA, whether it's, new builds and even perhaps those that might expand, build on their current locations, because I think we all agree that those trucks are having an impact on our rural secondary roads. And look like you only jump in. I would like to see that somehow, and I asked about the cost for a reason, just because, I'm a little torn there, I'll be honest, because, like if you talk about like a Lowe's warehouse that perhaps it generates a lot of income
Not that
versus
much.
a smaller, it's still an industry that, how do you delineate which ones you would require? Do you do it by square footage? Do you do it by, I don't know the answer, but I definitely think that some industry, we need to have a requirement there.
Just going back a little bit to your comment about truck turning and maneuvering, on some of the site plans we receive, they do actually, usually the larger commercial or industrial projects with many loading bays. Again, on some of the plans, they do actually put on the truck turning lines, how a truck would turn in, if it needs to back into the loading dock, how it would do that, based on the common truck length. I've seen it maybe 2 or 3 times here with some of the warehouses that have been approved. The Lowe's warehouse was approved before I arrived at the town, so I'm not aware if that was on those plans. But that's something that could be added for new industrial developments, warehouses specifically. That would only address turning and maneuvering, not the TIA. That was the only comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, because I know for some of those, even like you were saying, that knowing the route that they would take, because some of them take the craziest routes that you can imagine, certainly going to the 4-way stop and then trying to take Presbyterian in a tractor trailer is not the best route to take, but it's impacting ditches, and it's, requiring our emergency services to come out and get them freed from the ditch and things like that. So, I would love to see something in there that addresses that.
A lot of times, there's wayfinding available with this, depending on the type of use it is, where there can be signs. This DOT is very specific about what they'll put up, wayfinding signs or trailblazing signs, however you say it, to help vehicles get there. The GPS is not always for trucks. And we've seen that happen where, well, my GPS said I could make it this way, and they end up on a gravel road with, hairpin turns or switchbacks.
That problem in Spruce Pine.
Yes, sir, you bet. So, addressing trucks. If we wanted to say 100 passenger vehicles a peak hour or X number of trucks, maybe that would cover it. I just don't know. Or if we did it where any type of, we want to be careful, warehousing can be defined different things. Or distribution center can be defined different things, as different things. So, I don't know, I can look into it and see how other municipalities handle trucks versus passenger cars. Yes, ma'am.
I have another question. So we usually look at TIAs for a new development of some kind, a new building or a new subdivision or whatever. What about existing organizations that whose situation changes?
Great question. It would be, we would probably want to have the ordinance say an additional 100 or change in use that generates an additional 100 or whatever threshold. We want to say 75. So that what we do as traffic engineers, sometimes the change isn't that much. So we look at the existing use, we look at the future proposed use, and if it's say 50 vehicles a day, we just write a memorandum and explain based on our trip generation why we're able to come up with that. TIA is not required. And the idea generally, I can speak for what we said when I was at Asheville. 100 trips in a peak hour is something most infrastructure can handle. Anything beyond that, then it needs to be looked at. Anything under that, the infrastructure should be able to handle that. And then what do you get if you do a TIA for under 100 trips in a peak hour? You're probably not going to see any kind of mitigation because it's not going to make that much of an additional impact. So what we could do is we could write in the text that an additional X number of trips in a peak hour or an additional 1,000 or 500 or whatever number we choose daily trips over the existing use, because it would be a change of use. If it's 3,000 trips per day, the DOT is going to step in automatically. It requires part of the driveway permit.
And that would cover things like, and I'm making this up because I don't go in school zones during those hours when drop-offs and
Right.
things, if I could help it. But if something changed that the school, again, I'm making it up, the school bus service was cut, or parents decided they didn't want their kids to ride the school bus anymore. So you had an increased number of parents dropping kids off. So that would cover that as well. And I can't think of another industry or business that would have a similar situation, but just, we've talked about schools and, as we develop more kids attending the schools, those kids have got to get to school somehow. So that would still be the same trigger then, I guess, if.
That's a great question. Now, that's an existing use. They're not asking to change the use. And if they ask to build a bigger school, then maybe that would trigger it. The school, fortunately, North Carolina has a group called MSTA. Help me, School Transportation Assistance, MSTA. And I cannot remember what the M stands for. Is it? I think it may be municipal.
Yeah.
There is a group in Raleigh, and that's what they do. They look at schools. They've got their spreadsheets that they've developed, and they're really pretty accurate because I've done counts. Wow. They can tell you the number of buses are going to be required, the number of parents are going to be driving, and it's really pretty good. There's mountainous areas versus what we call down east. So the school then would contact them. They would get a consultant like Colin or myself. We would look at it. We would do accounts, traffic study, et cetera, write up a report, make recommendations. And that would in turn help with seeking funding. Either for the new school, that would be part of the project to make these improvements, or for an existing school, they would, look for money to fix problems like maybe add a turn lane and improve sight distance or something like that, or work on a traffic signal, maybe another phase protected left or something like that.
Would it be to our advantage to put something in our text amendment that would address that if whatever the type of organization is grows, however we describe that, grows somehow, that would trigger a TIA?
Yeah, I think that would be good. So it would be anything that came before the town for permits, as part of the permitting process, that met the threshold of increased traffic. And so that may require them to get someone to do trip generation and see if it's going to be, if we add another 10,000 square feet to the warehouse, is that going to cause us to have to get a TIA? Or if we double the warehouse, now we got 100,000 square feet, will that require it? So
Or a new wing on the school.
a new wing, that's right. Anything that would come before us, before council, before Board of Adjustments, or even just come into the town for a permit, that would be an additional trip generator. So we want to be careful and not set the threshold so low that it's just constant. I mean, our industry would be fine, it wouldn't help me, it would help Colin. But it's a lot of expense that you don't really get anything out of. If we have the right number, then the studies that are going to be done are going to assist us by having those improvements made. And once they're in the TIA, usually DOT makes them requirements. Sometimes they add their own. But if it's in the TIA, if I put in a TIA, add a traffic signal, that becomes part of the driveway permit. No signal, no driveway permit. So that it does become binding.
If I can,
Absolutely.
so Jeff is talking about not setting the threshold too low. I work with a lot of communities where the threshold is 50 peak hour trips. The result is a lot of traffic studies get done, but not necessarily any more improvements are made. What you may end up is a small development being that straw that breaks the camel's back, and it becomes it can have an economic detriment for development, because now a small development is having to jump over more hoops to get approval. They got to spend more money, $10,000 plus. So their pro forma in working up a single family development, they've got to put that cost into the new homeowner, and it becomes increasingly more difficult for them. And if there's a nearby intersection that's already failing, it becomes their responsibility. And so setting the threshold at 100 or more is usually I've always seen this kind of a better number than anything less than that.
I was going to make a similar comment from the staff perspective, just around major subdivisions, because it's the only one we require in the ordinance currently. Whether this board decides, to suggest a text amendment looking at number of units or trip generation thresholds. Echoing your comments, requiring a TIA for a subdivision of 12 houses is unnecessary, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's once it goes through the DOT, if we require it, it has to be submitted to DOT and they have to review it. And Their backlog is there, and they are statutorily have 50 days, 50 working days to make their review from the 10 days for their scope, and then 20 days for is it complete, and then 20 days is it correct. So that can add a lot of time too for a small development. One thing we have to do as part of a TIA is we have to identify an existing problem and make recommendations how that would be fixed, though the developer is not responsible for that. So if we find an intersection is failing, we need to put in there, it's currently failing, and the recommendation is by others. South Carolina doesn't like that. They say, you don't tell us what to do. But North Carolina, they want to see that. Then it's in the record, and for whatever reasons, it's there. So it falls on the developer to do no harm, to not make it worse. So, any questions? Anything else? I feel like I've talked the whole time. Thank you.
I think one of the things that immediately keeps stirring in my thoughts about this is, from our comprehensive plan level and everything like that, where we're looking for economic growth, but we're also looking to maintain our rural environment. And I don't know about y'all, but when you talk about one of the things, it's the busy level that's coming. And so we can either see the traffic or the shopping that are contributing to those, which of course are economic growth. That's the growth we want to see. But being behind 20 cars at an intersection takes away from that rural attraction. That's not what I want to do in my town for my feelings. I know that sounds just honest, kind of thing. I'm a small town boy, kind of that's what I want. So that's why I keep listening for is going, does the TIA end up allowing somehow to mitigate that and say, hey, is there a way to keep the rural feel? And I know that's kind of hard to do in this situation.
Well, that's a great question. And that comes down to level of service and what level of service are we willing to accept? And that's hard to describe. We all know what F is because we've all sat there because we don't make it through that intersection. Yeah. Nobody's listening and your microphone was not on. So we do stop at yellow lights. We do go ahead and stop when the light turns yellow. Yes. So that comes down to level of service. How can you make that level of service better? Adding a lane, right? Just add a lane. We don't always want to just add a lane. That's not always appropriate. It's very expensive to add a lane. Sometimes a turn lane, a short turn lane, works wonders. That may be a little more appropriate. Adding a through lane, not always practical. So that's what we look at as our recommendations. And it's quite common to say 100-foot dedicated right turn lane, 100-foot full storage, and appropriate tapers. That would be a recommendation. So the developer, as part of it, now you wouldn't want that for 12 homes. You wouldn't want that even for 148 necessarily, but for 500, it's quite reasonable for them to go and install turn lanes. Sometimes it's a left turn lane or right turn lane at an intersection that's a mile away.
I think you bring up an excellent point, though. The difference between the 12 and the 148 here is because, and I know you obviously have the professional experience, but as soon as you say 148 to me, wow, yeah, that's where I'm going. That's right. And I know that small town boy again. I realize that. Yes, I agree with that. But that was the thing I thought was very interesting. Why is it that apartments are less? Because when I lived in apartments, it wasn't less.
I know. I've lived in apartments too. Colin?
Every area has that same question. They think, oh, well, apartments should generate more. And you're thinking about it in the mass of because they're condensed together.
Right.
And so you're seeing, but a single family home, I've got 2 teenage children. We've got 4 cars. Everybody's driving to school, to work. You tend to have more services. Whereas the cable guy is not going to come, he's going to serve multiple at an apartment complex, whereas he's having to make separate trips to each cul-de-sac to serve each home. And so that's where it gets down to, you typically have more drivers in a home and you're having more service calls in the aggregate for the same number of homes.
Now, does that have anything to do with city apartments versus rural apartments?
Well, yeah, when you get to into an urban area, now you're getting at a mode split. So you've got walkers and bikers. And so that's where something in the city of Asheville, an apartment complex downtown, they may not generate half the traffic that a high density would here in Mills River, because they've got mode split. Yeah, they've got transit opportunities. And so that's the advantage in that situation.
Yeah, the single family homes generally think about 10 per day. And apartments a little closer to 7. Something else with apartments is you may have the time periods are a little different too. The people, depending on where they work, how they work, whatever. And something else we're seeing nowadays, a lot of people work from home. I've been working from home for almost 2 years. And that's really cut down on the amount of trips I make. Although I still go out for lunch. Sometimes maybe run a few errands, a little retail therapy. But Laurie, you didn't hear that. So anyway, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Questions? And the way that's determined is it's through studies and studies and studies, and there's lots of them, and it's all averaged. And we saw new numbers with the last generation, the last edition, and they've actually come down a little bit. And I think that may be starting to recognize that more people are working from home. It's a new dynamic.
But will it stay that way? And you can't bank on that.
I don't know. I kind of like it.
I'm sure you do. Okay, so to just give unless you guys have really pressing questions that you would need answered, I'd like to kind of try and give Mike some direction in moving forward, because I know this is not the end of this conversation. But perhaps to give a starting point at maybe developing some language, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of us have concurred that we do believe we need to add some sort of text amendment to propose that we require additional TIAs for certain types of development. So I think where we could start is perhaps giving what we think would be a good peak hour threshold. And then I, for myself, would love a little bit of investigation into dealing with the whole truck thing, the truck situation. I have leaned towards 75 trips per peak hour. I know you've mentioned 100, you've mentioned 75. You should have never said the 75, because I latched right on to that. But we can talk about it and see what you guys think.
Would be looked at differently. Trucks, large trucks like 18-wheelers, right? As far as the wear and tear on the roads and things they do.
I think we could maybe address that somehow. We'll see how it's addressed in other places.
And that's what I've asked him to do, is to look and see how that maybe do some research on how that's addressed in certain places, so that we could somehow tie that into our own.
I mean, it could be as simple as saying one truck, 18-wheeler equals 4 cars. There are passenger car equivalents out there that are used in highway maintenance, like for the interstates, that takes into account the amount of work that's put into the pavement from the trucks. So we could possibly look at that. We'll find out and see what's done in other places. But yeah, I agree. 75 is not unreasonable. I've seen 50. So, yeah, that'd be low. Yeah.
I've written ordinances that say 50, so I mean,
So, yeah, if we want to look at 75, I'm fine with that. I do think we need, 75 would probably cover anything. If we choose 100, I think we should also choose 1,000 a day, or even 750 in a day. 75 and 750, or 100 and 1,000, or something, because there are some uses that produce a lot of daily traffic that may not have that peak hour impact.
Right.
So I think we ought to kind of.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Capture
75,
that.
70, 750, yeah.
If that's the pleasure, then I would definitely support that. And then we might see how trucks are an equivalent for trucks. Or equivalent number of trucks, 25 trucks in a peak hour or combination thereof.
And I just remembered it drifted back through. It takes just it goes quickly, but it drifts back through. What Cheryl was talking about, what we mentioned about, addressing, expansion, additions to structures, that making sure that they're not grandfathered in because they were already, cleared when they initially built, but if they just make sure that that's included as well.
how do you compensate in your studies for narrow roads, narrow rural roads, narrow twisting rural
That's
roads?
an excellent question.
Oh, wow, great question. Up until recently, it's really hard because the highway capacity manual, which we use, and part of what's highway capacity? I-26 5 years ago had a lot more capacity than it does today. Why? Well, they've narrowed the lanes down. And when you narrow the lanes down, we slow down. We slow down, we bunch up. So a 2-lane road that's 18 feet wide, that's the NCDOT secondary road standard, hasn't really been addressed by the highway capacity manual. It's usually just freeways and larger roads and multi-lane roads. I understand the new one, which I'm excited to get, will address 2-lane roads.
When's that coming?
I think it's coming pretty soon, isn't it?
It's, or it just came.
Either it just came out or it's on its way.
We've been talking about it the last couple of weeks.
Got to get one of those, right?
Yeah.
Can't afford to have a highway capacity manual gap. We got to have one too. So anyway, that may help us address some of that with levels of service. And then we could look out and say, well, we also want the level of service on the surrounding roadways. I don't know that we're ready to add that now because nobody does yet. But it could be something we could add later once we have a way to measure that. Because right now, we look at the intersections, because that's the choke points. That's how we determine levels of services. How does it affect that intersection? Because that's where the turning movements occur and the right-of-way is either available if it's an unsignalized and there's not much traffic, or it has to be assigned either through an all-way stop or through a traffic signal. That's all a traffic signal does. It gives you right-of-way. Does that help? Does that make sense?
I definitely think at some point Mills River needs to be pioneers and be the first ones to add levels of service in their ordinance.
For secondary roadways,
Correct.
non-intersections.
Correct.
But
we won't do that yet because I understand this new
Sure.
manual is going to be helpful. But I think that's important. And I think that is one of the things, like Heath was talking about, that's going to maintain the rural feel, at least off of the main thoroughfares.
And that's also could be part of the zoning process, where when a piece of property is zoned, it's got that in mind. That, okay, this is a residential land, we really don't want 18 tractor trailers in an hour coming here. And so that's already handled. And as part of a rezoning process, it would be looked at and say, is that really what we want in this zoning? And more of an industrial type zoned area, well, you expect that. And so the proper use in the proper zone may help handle some of that. Just to add another 100 cars on a 2-lane road, that may or may not be easy. I don't want to use the word easy, complicated. Because when you look at complicated, how do you fix that? Widen the road, well, then the speeds go up. Or,
That's the double-edged sword. You know, if you widen it, it's kind of, you know, a lot of the urbanism thinking is to narrow the roads to calm traffic, slow traffic down. So you got a narrow road, but you're adding traffic, so now let's widen the road even from, to 12-foot lanes. Well, now traffic's gonna flow.
Which defeats what you're trying to accomplish. in the
Right,
first place.
Correct.
yeah. So, but it's good. I think we should look at it. We should look and see if there's something. Can we require a developer to widen a mile of roadway in order to build what they want to build? I don't know. If it's just wider, is that really going to do the job? Does it need to be structurally? Do they need to go to the subgrading, build the whole thing up, put more gravel down and then widen it? So it's not as simple as just adding a foot. I'd say take a motor grader and use a blade and do that, but that might sound like I've done that before. So,
No rural boy there.
so, widening a road versus widening a road that really does something as a wider road, just holds up better. So,
Mike, does that give you a place to start?
Or too many places.
Yeah, I was gonna make one comment. I mean, I'll have to do some state law research as well, because I mean, the state does limit, the exactions a municipality can ask from any private property owner developing their property. And then I was gonna have a question for you, I mean, can a municipality legally set their own limits of service for state roads?
I don't know about a state road.
We're in the Powellville program, but the only city maintained road is Town Center Drive.
As part of the approval process, like I said, I don't know if I mentioned, the Lincoln County requires at an intersection, all approaches be level of service C or better. And that's just blowing my mind, trying to figure out how to make sure that you can get that. So they do that, is they require, at least at intersections, that you maintain a certain level of service. But how do you do that? Well, if we have to add another lane to do that, that may not be what we want to keep the rural feel. Or is that legal? Can we require offsite developments? I don't believe that we can require an offsite development that requires a developer to get property. So let's say I want to finally, take it off, my business is taking off with making cat sweaters, and I've got so many that I want to build a factory. And so it's putting the sweater on the cat, and I apologize for getting silly, but just think about it. So I want to do this, I want to build this. But unfortunately, the traffic is so much a mile away. An intersection now is over capacity, but it's an intersection that was built before the state bought right of way. So there is no right of way. So the only solution is add a lane. Well, I can't add a lane because there's no right of way. And the person that owns that is a dog person, and they don't want another cat sweater factory. So they're not going to give right of way. I, as a developer, cannot condemn. I have no powers of condemnation. The town may, but is that something the town wants to use? That's one of those, it's a nuclear hand grenade. You can't throw it far enough, in my humble opinion, to condemn land for a private development. So, yeah, we got to be careful what we ask for. In cases like that, as in my TIAs, I just point out what should be done and that the right of way is not available. Therefore, it should be considered in future plans.
I think if we start down with the basics, which is the peak, the trips per peak hour and the trips per day, as well as some investigation into the truck impact, is a good place to start.
So just to summarize and clarify, the board's informally directing me just to conduct some research at this stage. Okay. And again, this isn't a formal agreement, but I heard 75 trips in a peak hour as a threshold and 750 trips per day. Looking into trucks and industrial uses, possibly having a truck to car ratio. requiring possible truck turning plans and access plans for industrial or commercial properties, and looking at building additions qualifying as well.
You got it.
So if there'd be anything that came before you that required a permit that hit those thresholds. So whether or not it comes before us or not,
Right.
and there may be uses that wouldn't need to come all the way to us, but it would hit those thresholds, it still need to do a TIA.
Okay. With that, are there any additional items that we need to discuss? Are there any updates, Mike, that you need to fill us in on, or Arlie?
I'll do lunch.
No additional items for the agenda. Yeah, I have no specific updates for tonight. The public hearing for the major subdivision public notice requirement, the text amendment this board initiated, is going to be on February 10th before town council. That'd be the only update I have.
Anyone have anything else? Okay. The floor is open for the magic words.
Make a motion with you.
I have a motion by Mr. Foster to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Moore. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Shockingly, that is unanimous. You guys have a great
In
evening.
case anyone watching is still awake, I apologize for talking so long.
Well, we'll do this.